The Winter Latina Show.
Hosted by IDM.
And we are recording everywhere, yes. So today we are not doing a live stream, so my life is a bit
Coming
easier.
to you from the past into the future, as sometimes
Exactly.
happens. So
So
we're
probably today,
imparting our historic wisdom onto you from about a week. So not too much wisdom there. So we're super, super excited to have a very special guest on today's installment of the Winter Latina Show. This is Boris Malagurski, who is a Serbian-Canadian filmmaker, writer, political commentator. In addition to his own projects, he's worked for various international media in Serbia. For instance, he's participated in RT's documentary project, which was very popular. He's been described as one of the most popular young professionals in the film industry by some of these media sources. He's made several films. And so this is just a summary of his work. I think one of his most recent films received a ton of accolades, both in terms of audience reception and professionally in the film industry, in terms of film festivals and awards. I'm talking about Srpska. And we're going to talk about all of these topics today. So our focus is going to be the Balkans, Europe, the world, and perhaps certain historical subjects as well. So Marcelo, let's bring Boris on.
exactly. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Malagurski. How are you doing, Mr. Malagurski?
Hello there. I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Thank you for coming. Super excited.
Thank you for
I've
having
been
me.
following your work for a long time, both on RT, your personal projects. Please correct me if I've didn't describe you in the way that you would describe yourself, or if there's anything important that I missed.
I would have described myself in much less words. I guess, after all these years making all these films, I don't really try to focus that much on what I did. I try to focus on what I'm going to do next. So I would have just said, Serbian-Canadian filmmaker, and that's it.
Interesting. So do you yourself describe yourself as Serbian-Canadian, or do you
I do,
prefer
because
to be?
yeah, I lived in Canada for 6 years. I am a Canadian citizen. Even though I don't live in Canada right now, I still think that living in Canada has helped me progress in my career. It has given me the opportunity to look at the world in a different way, to look at the Balkans as well from outside of the Balkans, which gives a broader perspective to the region and to what's going on there, figuring out that the processes that are going on over there are not unique just to the Balkans. It is a sort of global issue. So I think that in trying to tie in those issues in the Balkans to global events that are happening around the world, that has drawn, I think, audiences to watch these films, because they realize this is not just about Serbs or just about people in the Balkans. It is a sort of human issue. It is a global crisis in a way.
This is very interesting to me because I'm a Russian Canadian, and I describe myself as a Russian Canadian. I am a Canadian citizen too. I lived in Canada for much, much longer, although I'm not currently there. And even though I am very attached to my Russian identity, it's difficult to disconnect from Canada completely because certain formative experiences happen there. And much like you said, you're looking at Russia from the outside. So I'm curious, beyond professional, your professional experiences, how else has living in Canada informed your life, your work, perhaps getting your education there? I'm assuming this is where you received your education in film. How else has it been informative for you?
Yeah, I studied film at UBC. It's hard to say what it would have been like if I didn't go to Canada, what kind of person I would turn into. You're right. I too spent my formative years in Canada. I was there from age 16 to 22. So Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Seem to have been breaking up for a moment. So this is a very crucial time in the life of an individual, and I'm sure that living in Canada has broadened my horizons in the sense that I've already talked about, but it also brought me close to an industry, the film industry, which is very well developed in Vancouver, specifically where I lived. And gave me a sort of experience that maybe I wouldn't have gotten had I continued my studies somewhere in Serbia. Maybe I would have. I don't know. I just simply can't tell. But obviously, it has given me the professional side of the skills that I needed to make all these films, and I'm very grateful to all my professors at UBC who helped me become the filmmaker that I am. And at the same time, I also felt that the going into Canada solved this sort of issue for me that a lot of Serbs have, thinking that once they leave Serbia, all their problems are going to be solved, and just going to Canada or the U.S. or anywhere in the West is kind of going to the promised land, and there, all you have to do is like slouch to pick up the gold. It's like you don't have to work, you don't have to do anything. Everything is solved, everything is perfect there, and everything is horrible here, and will never get better. This is sort of the sense that people have in Serbia. And this is what I grew up with, living in Serbia, people telling me nothing's going to ever change here, nothing's going to be worthwhile here, you might as well just leave. And going to Canada, I realized, there's a lot of things that work better in Canada, obviously, but at the same time, it's not the promised land. It's not this country where all of these issues that we have in Serbia have been solved. As a matter of fact, there are issues in Canada that we don't have to deal with in Serbia, and Canadians do. And so, it's give or take. It's like there's good sides, there's bad sides as well. The bad sides definitely for me are a lack of, social cohesion, in the sense that people like to spend time with each other. People know how to relax. People, know how to have fun without, getting drunk every weekend and stuff like that. This is talking from the perspective of somebody growing up there from age 16 to 22. So, I had different ideas of how to spend my free time. Canadians had, ideas that I just didn't fit in with. So I didn't, enjoy that aspect of Canada that much. But I realized that I actually started valuing the time I spent with my friends more after living in Canada, because, here I really felt that people cared about, what I had to say, where I was going through, what I was feeling. You really had these really close friendships, and you could go into somebody's house and expect to get like drinks and food, and you would offer drinks and food to your guests as well. This was like really normal in Serbia, but in Canada it was like, really, strange and awkward. And I don't know, just people were more socially awkward in Canada. Not everybody, of course, but just on a general level, more socially awkward than here. And this is something that I just didn't like that much. Plus, the issues that people were dealing with in Canada, it never really struck me personally. And I also had this feeling that I was, living in Canada that had these first world issues. And while I had, my people in Serbia going through like really urgent issues that nobody was addressing that much. So I felt like I was more useful in Serbia.
Is this what made you come back?
Well, that and falling in love with this amazing girl who's now my wife and the mother of my two kids. I guess, coming to Belgrade in 2011, I believe, to make a film about Belgrade, I was looking basically for an excuse to stay here because I really wanted to stay. And then I fell in love, and she really wanted to stay, and I really wanted to stay. So like, well, it was meant to be, and I'm so glad I did, because, we have an amazing life together here. And people often ask me, like, do you ever regret going to Serbia? Do you ever feel like going back to Canada? I always say no. I don't regret it. I don't plan on going back there. I really like it here. I would go and visit there and maybe spend certain periods of time, but to be based in Canada again, it just doesn't pull me anymore. And maybe it will in the future, I don't know. But at this point, I'm really happy here, and I think that the quality of life here is actually better from my viewpoint than in Canada, because in Canada everything revolves around work. Even though I work hard here and I work quite a lot, life isn't defined by what you do. It's not, in Canada, when you meet somebody, the first thing people ask, oh, what do you do? It's like, what do you work? That's what defines you. That's the first thing I need to know about you. And then I can, base my opinion on you based on that. And it's quite normal to, ask people how much they make. In Serbia, it's you don't ask anybody how much they make. It's like really rude. And it's like, you talk about your viewpoints, you talk about your opinions, you talk about how you feel, and stuff. Like, these are the topics that we discussed, not like what did you do at work. It's like there is a life outside of work, in Serbia. So I've actually met several Americans and Canadians, not Serbs who live there, but actual full-blooded Americans and Canadians who actually moved to Serbia because they like the living, the style of living here more than they do back home. So, and they talked about, the food being healthier, the quality of living, the free time they have to spend doing what they like. We make less money, but it's, the money you make, sort of everything is a little cheaper as well. So the money you make gets extended. It's like in Serbia, we really don't make that much money, but we somehow go on vacation every year, several times a year. We somehow manage to buy all these things that many Americans have as well. We make it in this fragile economy. And we eat healthier. You go down the streets of Belgrade, people look healthier. They look fitter. It's just, you go down the streets of some, random city in Ohio, and it's like a lot of overweight people, a lot of, sick people in the United States, overwhelming the healthcare system and all these things. So, and they say they live in the greatest country in the world. I don't really know what makes them the greatest country in the world, to be honest, because if you look at the statistics, they're not number one in anything except, the amount they invest in military hardware and just investing in military in general, and maybe our incarceration levels. Those are the two things that America is number one in the world. Everything else, they're way below a bunch of European countries. So, yeah. So
I think there's a lot of internal propaganda in addition to, the way you described the myth of the West, people from, Slavic countries, Eastern Europe, immigrating and then realizing that things are not perfect. They might be better in some regards, but worse in others. That's one thing, but there's also a lot of domestic propaganda about, the garden, to quote Mr. Borrell from the European Union. And so, yeah, I think people kind of buy their own BS in that sense. And some people just, like you're saying, they really haven't traveled to experience the world firsthand and to realize that, the coveted Protestant work ethic is not the end of all things. There's life beyond that, kind of like you're saying, asking people what they do as the defining moment of their life. But I'm really curious, when you decided to return after a few years in Canada, how were you perceived by the locals? Were you perceived as more Canadianized, to live in a native country?
Insane. I was considered insane. Why would you move here? We all want to move there, and you can, and you did, and you can stay there. Why would you move back? And I remember being invited to a bunch of like discussions, Q&As and stuff like that, where people would ask me like, why should we stay in Serbia? Like, you lived there, why did you move back? And I remember this one guy raising his arm and said, why should I stay in Serbia? Because I don't have, money to drink, to buy myself a beer on the weekends. And I said, well, what do you, what's your job? And he said, well, I'm a student. I'm like, yeah, but what do you do outside of that? It's like, well, I'm a student. That's it. I was like, yeah, so you're spending your parents' money. You don't have a part-time job or anything. How do you expect to have money then to buy a beer? I mean, if you want to buy something in Canada while you're studying, you get a part-time job, you get a summer job, you do something, you earn your money and you buy something. Like if you went there, that's what you'd have to do. You know, that's what you would definitely need to do if you want to buy a beer, or for that matter, you know, live somewhere, have a roof over your head. You know, a lot of students have to work to study. They can't just, you know, a lot of people, Serbs generally don't work while they're studying. They live off their parents, right? And they complain. Like this is, I don't think they, you know, if their parents can finance their studies, that's fine. That's nice. But you know, then don't complain. You already have a roof over your head. You have your, you know, your basic needs covered. So if you want more than that, go get a job. I mean, that's something that you would have to do there. But then they're like, well, how can I do that here? Well, just like anybody else, you know, you go and find a job. It doesn't have to be some kind of, you know, highbrow, sophisticated job. You can, you know, you can be, you know, a waiter or waitress. You could, you know, work at McDonald's or anything. Like there are McDonald's in Serbia as well. So, you know, you could do any kind of job if you want that extra cash. And when you finish your job, you could always, you know, and when you finish your studies, you could, you know, get a job right after that. Maybe not the one you want right away, but just get a job. You know, people complain. I remember there's like these newspaper articles in the Serbian media that say, as this one student like finished with top grades and everything like that, and she sent out like 5 resumes and nobody called her back. She was like, well, now I'm moving from Serbia. It's like 5 resumes, like you have to send like 100 a day in Canada to get a call back, you know. And she's like, well, I sent 5, you know, and they didn't call me back. Like there's something wrong with this country. I was like, well, you know, it is strange to talk to people and realize that they have this really weird outlook on how they think things should work. And the thing that fascinated me, for example, when I went to Mexico City to screen my film at Tec de Monterrey University, I remember all these students came up, Mexican students came up to me after the film. I think it was The Weight of Change 2. And they all had business cards. And I was surprised because there's students that have business cards. And they gave me the business cards, and business cards said like CEO. So they're a student and they had CEO business cards. And it was like a really small business, like export import, something really, really small. But they were the CEO, that they started their own business. They're a business owner, right? Or I'll assume maybe, you know, it worked out, maybe it failed. But they had this precious experience where they, you know, didn't spend their free time partying and just like doing nothing. They already started doing something. So this is a way of thinking that's close to me. Like I'm somebody who really works hard, but who really plays hard as well, so to say. And I like to spend my free time, you know, enjoying talking to my friends, spending my time with family now more than anything, of course. And, you know, this is something that you can have in Serbia if you want to work hard. Of course, you can be successful in Serbia. You can be successful, I think, anywhere to a certain extent. And then there, for everything else higher than that, then you do have to be sort of involved in the social mechanics of any society and try to improve the things that need improvement.
Yeah, it sounds like having this outside perspective is definitely necessary to understand that the grass may not be greener on the other side, but also things might work more similarly to where you live in terms of, you know, like you're saying, getting that work experience. But I'm curious, go ahead.
If I may just enter here for a second, yeah, it's extremely interesting, this perspective, because I've as a, you know, South American, a Brazilian, so Brazil as a country is a very rich country, but we do have a lot of you know, social difference there. So it's you know, moving out of Brazil is something that will build you a better life, let's say. Even I have a lot of friends living in Canada, in the United States, and a lot living here in Europe as well, and others even, you know, to the east, to China, to Russia. It's very interesting because for me, I never had the American dream. You know, my perception of the United States was, you know, the American dream was 3 jobs a day, you know, high pressure, high salt, high sugar. I mean, I do enjoy having a McDonald's every now and then. I don't lie, but even McDonald's,
European
it's
McDonald's and
natural.
Asian McDonald's is better than North American McDonald's, by the way.
No,
It's
Brazilian
different.
McDonald's is even better than
That is
any
so true.
McDonald's.
Yeah.
No, not even kidding. My favorite sandwich is a Brazilian only, but yeah, it tastes artificial. You know what I mean? When you see Disneyland food or stuff like that, it looks Dunkin' Donuts. Those they look artificial. And when I came to Europe, even to the Brazilian standards, Europeans, they eat very well. They eat very healthy. They use much less. If you see the food, they use much less, poison, for crops and stuff like that. They eat much more natural, from the producer. And it's interesting that you went from a country, and yeah, we have a way of life here in Europe much more calm. Even, I'm in Italy, you're in Serbia, so even like that here in Italy, it's much more relaxed. When I came here, I was like, nobody's working. What the hell's going on with these people? I come from Brazil. We have to work very hard because we make very little money, and so yeah, it took me a lot of time to start to get used to relaxing a little bit. And when you were explaining your experience, I was at the same time identifying myself at some points, and at the other points, I was identifying Brazil, much like the North American way of living. The last time I've been to Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, where I'm from, the people, the Brazilian people who has been known by being, beautiful beach people, especially Rio de Janeiro, going to the gym every day, all that. People were fat, and not everybody, of course, but a lot of people were fat and overweight. And I saw on the shopping centers a lot of hamburger shops and very little, pasta and Brazilian food as well. So that kind of scared me from the perspective of Rio de Janeiro. That kind of scared me a
In
little
like
bit.
the Americanization of it.
Yeah, well, it has to do with
Very
both,
strong.
the food and the way of life. It's like if you work more, most of the jobs are sitting down. You're not moving that much, and the food, that gets offered, gets propagated through all the media, is full of sugar. Right. I actually, in the past year, I lost 20 kilograms of weight by simply removing the sugar from the equation. So
Congratulations. That's amazing.
yeah, thank you. That's basically it. People ask me, "Oh, you lost weight. How did you do that?" I just stopped eating carbohydrates to an extent that it didn't influence my health in a bad way, and I've never felt better, and I try to move more. I try to go to the gym at least 3 times a week, and but I don't even think that the gym is what helped me lose weight. I think it was the food. I think the food is most of it, and this is what, the moment the Americanization of the food system enters, you have overweight, people, you have obesity, you have diabetes, you have all these illnesses that have to do with sugar, with an unhealthy lifestyle. It's not happening just in Brazil, as you said. It's happening in China as well. The Chinese used to have a fairly healthy diet of rice and a few other vegetable based ingredients. Now they're all mostly going to McDonald's and all these fast food joints. So I think the fact that McDonald's and KFC and all these folks leaving Russia is actually going to help the Russian people's health. I'm kidding to an extent, because I know that these restaurants still stayed under different names, but
Yes.
but if you can, I always tell people, try to not just having not having a dessert after lunch or something like that, but like the carbohydrates, the pasta, the bread, and all these things we, especially Slavic people, like. We love bread, It's a
Love our
part of our
potatoes.
culture. It's a part of our religion as well. But if we just keep it down and at least even there's a couple of hacks like eating your vegetables first and then your proteins and your fats and then the carbohydrates at the end of the meal. Even if you just do that, does wonders to this is starting to turn into a
I hope
health
so.
show.
Well, I just wanted to just make a quick comment. I think the level that food is processed in North America is just unprecedented. Like you can't go to a store, from what I understand in Europe, but also in Russia, and find milk that's gonna last you for 3 months with an expiration date in October. But you can walk into the nearest grocery store in North America, and that's typical. You actually have to look for milk that expires in a week and then has to be locally made. It's very difficult, and everything is like that. Once you start reading labels, it's actually kind of shocking the amount of oils that are not really good for you that are being used to create all these foods. Even if you're cooking your own ingredients, it's almost like kind of depressing that it's not as easy to even make your own food that's healthy when you realize where it's coming from. I was buying salmon and said artificial color added. I couldn't find salmon that didn't have that label on it. So yeah, I mean, this is definitely an in-depth discussion that maybe we can have another time. It's very frustrating if you live in North America and you're aware of these issues and you're trying to eat healthy, and then you're running into these problems based on access to, even if you have farmers markets in the summer. But let's shift gears a little bit. I'm curious whether you can talk a little bit about your trilogy, The Weight of Change, how the first film came about and how it progressed. So just for our viewers who may not know, the first one was released in 2010, from what I understand, and the third was released in 2019. So there was a little bit of time in between each installment. So I'm curious whether you consider the first one sort of your first serious work or not, and how did it come about, and how did it progress from the first to the second to the third installment?
I think the first definitely received the most recognition that I've ever gotten up until that point. The fact that it was enlisted as a part of the Library of Congress really, speaks a lot, even though it's very critical of U.S. foreign policy and everything the U.S. and NATO did to Yugoslavia, the country where I was born in. They still decided that it had, merit and that it should be included. So the way I made The Way to Change was, fairly interesting because I just finished this film called Kosovo, Can You Imagine? It was this short 30-minute documentary where I didn't really plan on going to Kosovo to make this film. I just wanted to make like a documentary about what was going on because I organized protests against Kosovo's independence back in 2008, kind of hoping that Canada wouldn't recognize Kosovo's independence, considering their own history with Quebec and Quebec separatism and stuff like that. But when Canada did recognize Kosovo's independence, citing the reality on the ground, I was like, well, let's see what the reality on the ground really is. And then I started, contacting some people that I could interview. And this one guy who works at the UN asked the UN mission in Kosovo, UNMIK, asked me, like, sure, when are you coming to Kosovo? I was like, well, I wasn't really planning on going. He was like, oh, no, you have to come. Yeah, I'll show you around. And I eventually met through Scott Taylor, who's an amazing Canadian journalist who covered the wars in the Balkans. He introduced me to Princess Linda Karađorđević, who's a member of the royal family in Serbia, in Belgrade, who introduced me in turn with Mary Walsh, an Irish diplomat, who worked with the OSCE mission down in Kosovo. And Mary was, shocked at what she found in Kosovo, and she'd met a lot of Serbs there who completely, without any rights, and she drove me around Kosovo and showed me around and introduced me to all these people and their stories that I covered in the film. So it was this sort of whirlwind where I, had one idea, went, in a completely opposite direction, where I actually went on the ground and covered what was going on in Kosovo. And I was really happy that film got screened on, RT and Euro channel and all these other international channels. And after I made that film, I was like, well, this only covers a small piece of the story. It's like what's happening in Kosovo right now. What preceded all these events. And then you can't really cover Kosovo without covering all of Yugoslavia, because it's a part of the story of the breakup of this country that used to be a formidable power in Europe and in the world, and was one of the leaders of the non-aligned movement and had a really historical role to play. But I didn't have a budget. Like, it's one thing going to Kosovo and being driven around, and you can do that without a budget. Essentially, you just have a camera on you and you film. But this included much more travel, much more, archival footage and stuff like that. So I needed a budget. So I opened up a website, and I asked people, like, look, if you guys support the idea of this project, you can donate through PayPal. And suddenly people started donating, which was a really thrilling experience, because a lot of people were telling me, you're never going to make it. I set my budget, I think, at like $15,000, and people are like, nobody's going to give you 15. Yeah, you're a 20-year-old kid, who's going to give you $15,000 to make a film? I think in the end we raised like $22,000, and that's mostly thanks to Serbs from Australia who really helped out with this film, especially Branislav Grbovic, who I always mention whenever I talk about my career. He's an amazing guy from Perth in Australia, who actually organized fundraisers in Western Australia, where they showed my Kosovo movie and then collected donations for the next movie. So obviously the world premiere was in Perth, Australia, and we showed the film throughout Australia first, and then we went everywhere else. And it was it was an amazing experience, because in the film we actually showed footage of this village in Bosnia where Serbs and Bosnian Muslims, or Bosniaks as they're called today, lived together for centuries with no issues. And then suddenly with the end of the war and then the sort of partition of Bosnia, they had to move out. The Bosnian Muslims had to leave, and they were saying goodbye to their Serb neighbors in tears, and they were saying the best things about each other. So this really went, contrary to what the West was pushing about the Balkans, about how we all hated each other. And this war started because we all hated each other, obviously. When in the film, I actually described that the hatred was being manufactured to suit an agenda that was, in the end, very evident from everything that was happening from 1995, when the war in Bosnia ended, and from 1999, when the bombing of Yugoslavia ended, when most of these companies that were, bombed out were bought out by Western corporations. I mean, for example, during the bombing of Yugoslavia, whose aim was to help the Albanians, save the Albanians from the evil Serbs, they bombed the cigarette factory in the town of Niš in Serbia. Like, what kind of danger was the cigarette factory posing to the Albanian minority in Serbia? They were maybe dying from lung cancer, but it just didn't make any sense. They bombed out the cigarette factory. It was later bought out by Philip Morris for pittance, and these were just a few examples that I made in the film to show that the reasons behind it were economic. And besides Strobe Talbot, he was assistant Secretary of State, Deputy Secretary of State under U.S. President Bill Clinton. He actually said that as the world was moving towards the neoliberal economy, Belgrade seemed to be delighting in moving in the opposite direction. And it was Yugoslavia's resistance to the broader trends of political and economic reform, not the plight of the Kosovar Albanians, that best explains NATO's war. I believe that's an exact quote. So, there's a lot of stuff that we've been told about Yugoslavia, about Serbs, about all these countries in the 1990s. And I just felt that, the story needed to be told what really happened. And this was very personal for me, because when I lived in Canada and people asked me where I'm from, I would say, Serbia, and say, "Oh, Serbs, you guys are all war criminals. You attacked all these countries. You were the main cause, the only cause of everything bad that ever happened in the Balkans." Like, well, I was a kid back then. I was a teenager, and I didn't know that much. I was like, well, I better do my research so I know how to answer all these attacks that I'm getting out of nowhere. And people, or people didn't know. They were like, "Oh, is there war still going on there?" They just had no idea. So I was like, well, let me make this film that I can sort of carry around with me when people say like, "Oh, what's going on there?" It's like, yeah, here you go. You can watch this and, spend 2 hours of your life if you really care. And actually, for years after I made The Weight of Change, they used to actually carry the film around with me wherever I went. And when people ask me, it's like, here you go. That's why I made it. So there you go. Mission accomplished.
Yeah, I think the way you combine sort of more modern footage with historic archival information is really fascinating, the way you kind of weave this narrative together from different strands. And personally, again, as a Russian Canadian, I would credit Serbs that I've encountered in Canada for opening my eyes to the fact that the narratives that I saw on Canadian television were a little bit different from what was actually going on the ground. Not even so much the Russians. I mean, that came a little bit later. So I think that was really an important part of my own political development. So it was very interesting to me. And so what was, how should I phrase this? What was the progression from The Weight of Change 1 to The Weight of Change 3? Because it seems that you're going to broader subjects in sort of the final movie in the trilogy beyond the Balkans.
Yeah, well, in the first part, I talked mostly about the war and the political side of it. In the second part, I talked more about the economic aspect of what happened after all these wars ended. So basically how Yugoslavia was economically colonized. And I'm very happy that I managed to interview, some really big names, from Noam Chomsky to Oliver Stone to Michael Parenti to all these, other amazing individuals and professionals and public personalities that had, opinions that had weight. And it is called The Weight of Change. But in the third part, I wanted to focus more on the nature side, the biological, so the way that we're being destroyed biologically. And I think this is really important because our natural environment in the Balkans is under attack, and it's been under attack for the past couple of decades. I mean, when we talk about the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999, rarely is the impact on the environment discussed, and rarely is it discussed that how much depleted uranium was dropped on Yugoslavia and the impact it had on our health and the impact that remains to this day, because depleted uranium takes billions of years to decay. So it's something that's going to stay virtually forever in this region. So I kind of focused on that. I focused on, to an extent, GMO foods. I focused on the way that we ourselves are polluting our environment because of lack of awareness about all these things, and this is a problem. And I tried to, I'm not the kind of guy who's going to say, well, we Serbs are perfect, although we are. I'm going to say, like, yeah, we faced amazing, struggles, and we faced grave injustices, but we are to blame for some of the things that are happening to us as well. And it's constructive criticism. It's not to say that we're, bad people. We're great people, and there's good and bad people everywhere, of course. But it's to say that these are the things we can improve on. These are the things we can change for the better. And that's sort of more the motive behind The Weight of Change 3, is to say that, yes, there was this huge thing that happened to us. There was this huge injustice. But first of all, if we talk just about all these powers that are against us, it is sort of, demotivating us. It's sort of putting us in a position like, well, these powers are so big, we can't resist, so we might as well, just accept it and maybe complain, and that's it. What I'm trying to say is, yes, these things happen, but we can change it. There are examples of countries that have been able to resist, to very effectively try to, beat these big financial institutions. And this is what I talked about a lot in The Weight of Change 2 as well. I talk about the example of Iceland, a tiny country, because in Serbia, we often say, like, oh, we're too small, right, to resist any sort of big pressures. We're not, Russia, we're not China. We can't, go against the whole world if we want to, although we did several times and kind of held our ground, actually, quite successfully. which makes us pretty amazing, obviously. We can change things for the better in these regards as well. Iceland, a nation of 330,000 people, rejected the IC package, rejected the IMF, the World Bank, rejected these major powers, the UK, the Netherlands, and all these special interests that had their claws in Iceland's in the economic system of Iceland. And they've thrived ever since. We look at, for example, and then we say, yeah, but Iceland is like, an island in the middle of nowhere. We don't even have access to any sea. How are we supposed to be? We're dependent on everybody. And then I always mention the example of Hungary. I mean, Hungary doesn't have access to sea, and yet they've kicked out the IMF. They're trying to have a sovereign politics. You can't be completely sovereign, and no country can be completely sovereign. Not even North Korea. Even they have relations with other countries around the world, and they have to have good relations with China and other countries. So not even North Korea, which is like completely sealed off, right? Most of the rest of the world, even they have to have good relations with some countries, and even they have to sort of surrender at least a bit of their sovereignty. So it is impossible to be completely sovereign. But what we need to figure out how to do is to be independent enough so that the policies that a government enforces in your country do not go to the detriment of your own people, and that they work, in fact, for the betterment of your people. And this is especially true when it comes to the economy. I'm an economic nationalist. Absolutely. I think the national economy should work for the people where you live. And this is something that should be very non-controversial. Yet when you talk about, the ways in which rich countries, is what I talked about in Wage Change 2 as well, the way that rich countries became rich, they have been doing all these things they tell us small and poor countries not to do. They tell us don't, protect your economy, when they were very much protecting their economy while they were becoming rich. They say that, oh, you should embrace foreign investments, when they were limiting their foreign investments when they were starting to get rich. So they tell us all these things. Why? Because they don't want competition. They don't want partners. It's like we often hear our politicians say, well, we want to be partners with the EU. The EU doesn't want partners. They want satellites. They want countries that they can control, countries where they can dump their dirty industry, which is what I talk about in the Wage Change 3. They want countries where they can, have cheap labor to work in their companies and their factories with very loose labor laws that they can manipulate, and, using corruption, get countries to basically, allow them to put diapers in their workers so they don't have to lose time going to the bathroom. So this is stuff that's happening in Serbia, for example, and a South Korean owned company called Yura. This is what the relationship has to be. If you ask Western countries, if you ask NATO countries, and this is just something I wanted to address in all these films and say that, I'm not anti-Western. I'm not anti, Western values. And I firmly believe in what the West professes to be their values. I just show in my films that what they're doing mostly that isn't in line with those values that they, proclaim. It's something quite different.
Yeah, I think exactly as you said, the neoliberal ideology promotes competition until they're no longer at the top, which is why there is this hysteria around China, because China started to lead the way in various industries. And now we really have to stifle China's development in its access to various technologies, which of course ultimately ends up helping China become more sovereign in developing their own, their own technologies, et cetera. Yeah, it's really kind of fascinating. But it sounds like you keep coming back to economics and economic impetus. Would you put that, maybe international corporations, neoliberalism is obviously informed by economics, higher than geopolitics and, let's say, NATO's projection of power, going back to using Kosovo as, in my opinion, a glorified military base? So
Well, I
are
think that
economics higher than geopolitics? I mean, obviously they're intertwined, but what is your opinion from all of these investigations?
Well, I think that NATO is just an army of the Western political elite. I mean, what they do is they're not like, it's not just like global domination for the sake of global domination. It's global domination so they could reap the economic benefits. This is what has been driving empires throughout the world, right? It's not just like, oh, we're going to go and civilize the world. No, we're going to, take their resources and build up our economy. So NATO is behaving very much the way the British Empire's army behaved back in the day, creating all these army bases around the world. And these bases make it very hard for countries to rebel, to try to impose, different policies, because they can always very easily coordinate either a coup or some sort of takedown of the government through other means, using, their US aid and other NGOs like the National Endowment for Democracy, or, just like flat out using media manipulation to basically brainwash populations into thinking that the ruler that is actually good for them is actually against them. So I think that it all boils down to the economy, and I think that it is the geostrategic map. If you look at the map of the world where the U.S. has put their bases and everything, you can sort of see them encircling Russia and China and all these things. But this is because these countries are a threat, not just in, promoting certain values that they disagree with, but in the economic sense. You mentioned China, pushing out the U.S., pushing out the West in the economic field. This worries them a lot. And it's not like they want to just rule over the Chinese and have a colony. They're focusing on the resources. The Chinese are irrelevant, just like the Kosovo Albanians are irrelevant. They're just like foliage on the trees. It's not, they don't care about the people who actually live there. They care about the resources. They care about reaping the economic benefits of being the top dog in this country. So this is what they care about the most. NATO just helps them as an army that enforces, I think von Clausewitz is the one who said that politics is the continuation of economics by other means, and war is the continuation of politics by other means. So it all boils down to the economy, if you ask me.
Yes, if you have Clausewitz from the early 19th century talking about it, I think it's kind of amazing if you were to remove his name, that it's still relevant in the 21st century. Go ahead, Marcelo.
There's one thing very interesting that you mentioned, the National Endowment for Democracy. If you go to their site, to the web page, they are pretty open on telling where they are operating and how much they are spending here and there. The most amazing thing is that, they are the National Endowment for Democracy, right? You would imagine that they would be operating in countries that are not democratic, like Russia, like, China, like Iran. And in reality, they are not operating there, but they are operating everywhere else in the democratic world.
Well, they've been kicked out of Russia. So, I mean, certain countries have cracked down, realizing the hard way that there is a little connection to color revolutions that is probably not very beneficial to them to.
I mean, it's only.
What I mean
all you have to do is look at what Alan Weinstein, who was the first director of the National Endowment for Democracy, said in the early 1990s. That a lot of what the CIA did covertly, the National Endowment for Democracy does overtly. So, he made the connection. It's like, we don't really have to say anything about them after that, but a lot of people don't know that this was what the NED is doing, and they actually think that they're fighting for democracy, when in fact, they're just fighting for America's interests, because they're the one, payrolling the whole thing.
So do you see any parallels in sort of this broad domain that you've outlined between what's been going on in Ukraine since 2014 and the Balkans?
Absolutely. I think the method is basically the same. And I think I really feel bad for the Ukrainian people, because they voted for this politician, or rather this actor who became a politician, or the other way around, whatever you feel like saying. They voted for this guy who pledged to end the conflict with the Russians who were rebelling in the Donbass region. A lot of people don't know that the conflict in Ukraine didn't start in 2022, and this is something that's almost forbidden to talk about in the Western media. it started way back. It didn't even start, if you ask me, in 2014 with the coup in Kiev, with the Maidan revolution, so to say. I think it started even before that. I think it started in 2008 when George W. Bush invited Ukraine to join NATO and said that Ukraine should join NATO. And the fact that, Westerners who think that, well, why shouldn't Ukraine, join NATO? Why is that a big deal? I was like, you could always tell them, well, why shouldn't Russia have nuclear missiles in Cuba? What is the problem with that? When in fact the last time the Soviet Union had an idea to put nuclear missiles in Cuba, Washington freaked out, and it was like we never came closer to nuclear war. So countries have interests. If Russia or China, for example, had military bases and missiles on the border with the U.S. and Canada or in Mexico, the U.S. would freak out. It would be a huge deal. And so if you think that would be a huge deal, then you have to realize that Ukraine being a part of NATO is a problem for Russia. This is something that any geopolitical strategist knows. Yet they went ahead and invited Ukraine to join. And in 2014, the West basically demanded of then President Yanukovych to give up on all these, great subsidies and economic benefits that had with in a relationship with Russia to join the EU. And he basically sided with Russia, not because of emotions. This is what all people still don't understand. It was economically rational to do so at that point. Maybe that would have changed at some point, but at that very moment in history, it just made sense to do. And there's been so many documentaries from, Ukraine on Fire and all these things that if you look at, there's like, I recently watched like a 5-hour documentary on Ukraine that pulled out, all these quotes and video footage of the whole timeline, everything as it happened. And you just watch it, you just realize that they operate, as Marcelo said, they operate so openly that they don't even hide what they're doing. You have all these discussions and Q&As and panels where they very openly said that this is what we're planning to do. This is what we're going to do. And then you had all those tap conversations where you heard, American officials discussing who's going to be in the Ukrainian government and stuff like that. So it was a finance the stage revolution, something that I think is very similar to what happened in Serbia in 2000 when Milosevic was deposed, when Otpor was this CIA-backed group. And I'm not saying that Milosevic was a good guy. Just like I'm not saying Yanukovych was a good guy. And, there was corruption on the side of both of these individuals. And, but it's not up to us to judge these, it is kind of up to us to judge Milosevic because we lived here. But when it comes to Yanukovych, it's up to the Ukrainians to judge whether he was good or bad. So it's not up to us to talk about that. And certainly, I was somebody who actually, as a kid, protested against Milosevic in 2000. And I think it's a good thing that Milosevic is not in power. But I think that the people that came after Milosevic really messed things up and really, didn't make things better, but in many aspects made it much worse. So I think that, and I think that's also similar to what happened in Ukraine. I think if people in Ukraine were asked, well, would you prefer going back to 2014 before Maidan, before this whole conflict started and erupted and the country is going through chaos? Would you prefer that? I think most of them would say, yeah, because in the end, they voted for Zelensky because he promised to end this, to calm things down. And yet, I think that, in my opinion, he really didn't have any power to even try to do something differently. He was just on this trajectory that the U.S. demanded. And, this is most evident that after, Russian troops went into Ukraine, you have this deal that was reached, in Turkey between the Ukrainians and the Russians, and it was basically a done deal. And Boris Johnson goes in. This is not, Boris Malagurski talking about his, his friend Boris, who also has the same name, which is a beautiful name. Nothing
I
against
know
the name.
Boris Johnson ruined the name. Yeltsin Johnson.
No, he did not. I will make the name great
You'll
again.
make it better. You'll improve it. Yeah.
Make Boris great again.
Make Boris great again.
Gonna be huge. But I can't do a Trump impersonation. I'm sorry, but this is not me talking. This is I can't remember his name, but it was the chief negotiator of the Ukrainian
It was
side.
the Israeli. Well, there was also the Israeli politician who participated, and there's multiple sources who released this information.
For me, it was the Ukrainian negotiator. He said it. It's like if the Ukrainian negotiator said this, which kind of doesn't paint a very nice picture of the Ukrainian side, and it shows them to be clearly powerless. If he confirms that this happened, it happened, So, and why did it happen? Well, I think the reason was same reason what happened in Yugoslavia after, all these bombings and wars and coups. You had all these corporations that went in, and the same thing is happening in Ukraine right now. You have Zelensky basically signing off the reconstruction of Ukraine to BlackRock and all these, Vanguard and big investment companies that have already bought a huge chunk of Ukrainian land, that are investing money together with the U.S. government into Ukraine that never really goes to Ukraine, but goes to American defense contractors and manufacturers. And it's just a money laundering scheme. They say they're helping Ukraine, but the money goes back to the U.S., to all these companies. And then Ukraine gets stuck with the debt, right? That they can never repay back. But what they can do is give all their companies, give all their industry, give all their land. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe and the world, in a sense. This is their most valuable resource, and they're giving it away. And what really pains me is that the Ukrainians voting for Zelensky, they maybe thought that they were really voting for the character Zelensky was playing in the show. Who actually, I think there's an episode where the IMF demanded these horrific terms from Ukraine, and the character I can't remember what he's called in the series, but the character of the president of Ukraine that Zelensky is playing basically tells them to F off, and just like Ukraine is not for sale, and they're not gonna allow them to humiliate them and all these things. And then he throws the papers out, and it's like this huge dramatic scene, and the media were like, wow, he's our guy. And then right after Zelensky actually comes to power, he accepts all the terms of the IMF. Like, just accepts all of them. So, the Ukrainian people have been duped. They voted for this guy to end the conflict with Russians living in Ukraine. They wanted to live in peace. And they got, this guy who kept provoking Russia, who kept furthering NATO's agenda in the region. And, it's a very unfortunate turn of events. And I really hope that a lot of people would just stop and try to analyze the situation cold-heartedly, and not just getting into a heated, moment where they're like, oh, this is us against them. No, it's like the people there are dying. And I think anybody with half a brain in their head realizes this ends with some sort of negotiated settlement, something that could have been done with Istanbul, and it didn't get done because the West sabotaged it. And I think in the end, it's going to come down to some sort of agreement. I hope that's what happens. The alternative is like an escalation, which can end with a nuclear conflict. And this is something that people do not want. I hope most people do not want.
Do you think the elites are just milking the conflict, even though the situation on the ground is pretty obvious? Or do you think they're that reckless that they are not as cognizant of the nuclear component as they should be?
I think they're thinking that nuclear war is not an option. And I think that they truly believe that this is not something that's going to happen. But, throughout history, I believe there was 22 occasions when we almost had nuclear war. 22. So, there were lots of glitches. There were lots of, misinterpreted situations where people were, thinking that it's happening, and then we came. I think it was Stanislav Petrov who came like really close to sparking nuclear war because of a glitch, and then I think like it was like he saw on his screen it was like 5 nuclear missiles fired, and then he realized, well, wait, if it was like a full nuclear war, it would have been more than 5. I think that was his reasoning. I'm a little weak on the details, but I know we came really close to it. And what people don't realize is, when we are living in a situation where there are very high tensions, when there is a real threat of nuclear war, that just scared them enough into realizing that in these situations and heightened tensions like we had the Cold War, it doesn't really take a clear intention for the war to start. It can be a matter of just a simple glitch of, they're firing at us, so we'll fire back, but they're not actually. But then by the time you actually fire at them, they have to retaliate, and then you have people don't realize how scary nuclear war is. And the Americans did all these experiments back in Marshall Islands. This is what I talk about in The Weight of Change 3. To see how radiation affects people. That was a time when they thought, well, maybe we can survive this somehow. Let's figure it out. Let's experiment on these island people, because they're not really people, they're savages. This is how the U.S. consider them. So let's experiment on them, and they, had horrific results. I'll just say that the worst thing that I've heard of all the stories. And I mean, if you're, have a weak heart, just ignore this for the next 10 seconds, or put, fingers in ears. They had like this effect that was like baby jellyfish, the babies that were born, human babies that resembled jellyfish more than they did resemble humans. And they were breathing, they were still alive, but they were like jellyfish. So radiation bad. That's just you can put it if you're
Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not enough of an experiment to realize that it's not very good for people.
And they did all these things, probably thinking, well, maybe we could survive this. And then they realized, well, wait, you have nuclear winter, which is what happens when enough nuclear bombs explode. Then so much of this, hot air and smoke gets released in the atmosphere that it basically blocks out the sun, and we get, even a nuclear autumn would create a huge mess with the crops and all these things, and people would die of hunger, and it would just create a mess worldwide. So, and if we had a full-blown nuclear war, so it's not just the people who are dying in the immediate vicinity of the blasts. It's like you would kill off most of the world's population through hunger and starvation. In the northern hemisphere, which is where most of the countries that have nuclear weapons are. So it's like this horrible scenario that should be very evident to all these people. I think they're thinking that, well, it's probably not going to happen, so let's just see how far we can push it. But I think at some point they are going to say, well, we've milked this thing enough. This is what they did with, Iraq, with Libya, with Syria. They had these campaigns, and then eventually they were like, "Oh, let's move on to the next one." So I think it's coming to an end. I hope it's coming to an end. I hope that's what's coming. And I think that the new U.S. administration, I'm pretty sure that the Biden administration is not going to have a second term. I don't think Biden's going to be the candidate. I think he's going to pull out very soon, maybe even tomorrow, or maybe already did. I don't know.
Maybe it's happening now. Yeah.
By the time we're filming this, he might be replaced. But I still think that Trump is going to probably win, unless if there's like another attempt on his life, or
successful one.
A successful one, or there's foul play at the election. So and in that case, I think that maybe that's going to be a good excuse for all these. Well, Trump wants to end the war, so let's let him, because we've done enough, and it's going to be a settlement. And I think both sides are going to sort of get what they want, which is good. That's what negotiations are. No side should get everything. So I think this is the way forward for a better world. World powers coming together and talking things out and say, well, these are our spheres of interest. These are yours, and having actual competition. And that's not something the West is eager to accept. And empires are at their most aggressive when they're decline is inevitable. So I think that's what's happening with the West right now.
Yes, I think this is what we're seeing. And I guess in the case of Ukraine, we're going to have a settlement, hundreds of thousands dead soldiers later. But I guess it's better than nuclear winter that you've described. Let's shift gears a little bit. Your films cover political subjects. Sometimes it's things that are still happening and that are still very relevant. Sometimes it's looking into the future. Have there been protests around your films when you screen? Because you go all over the place to screen them, different countries, different continents. What has your experience been like? And if so, how did you handle them?
Yeah, well, oh, yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of, I have my haters, hi to my haters.
Remember to like, share,
haters.
subscribe.
Haters, like, share, subscribe.
Exactly. No, I like my haters because the haters drive up. I remember I have a politician friend in Croatia who says that he was telling me this story about this band in Croatia that used to have concerts throughout the country, and every time they would go to a city, they would pay journalists to write about the concert and everything, and then they would pay somebody to like badmouth the band, just like write horrible things about the band. And I was like, why? But well, because that drives up interest and it's like creates controversy, so more people come to the concert, as a result. So, they're doing all. I don't even have to pay them, which is really great. They do this for free. My haters do this for free, so thank you to all of them. I think we would have had.
Get to all the volunteer haters.
Absolutely, I remember. The Weight of Change, I believe the third part was premiering in New York, and we had Albanians protesting in front of the cinema. And we were doing okay with the film tour. It was like 80 to 90% full every screening. After that protest, 100% full. We actually, for some venues, had bigger venues. So they did an amazing job. So thank you to the Albanians in New York, for protesting and helping us, completely sell out the entire tour. And we had actually more cities wanting to watch the film after that. So it was fun. It was like, I think it was one of the most thrilling experiences. But I have to say one thing. The world has changed since 2019 when these protests happened in New York. For my latest film, Srpska Struggle for Freedom, we had a different problem, which actually was a problem. We had cancellations of venues. And this was an issue because, it's one thing to protest, one thing to say oh, we don't like what you're doing and then attack me. It's a whole other thing. Like, we're not going to let you even speak. We're not even going to let you show your work. It really showed that censorship has become mainstream in the West. This is something that was unimaginable just a couple of years back. You had the right to protest, but venues generally didn't cancel screenings, even controversial ones. They got extra security. It was very rare to have these screenings canceled or these events canceled. Cancel culture has become so prevalent that at this point, if you offend anybody, it doesn't even matter what you're saying or what you're doing or what the content of your film is. I mean, all these people were against this film. They didn't plan on protesting. You plan on coming and raising their hand or just like yelling at me or something like that. Their primary objective was, let's get this guy deplatformed. That's the term that they use, deplatform. So let's not allow this guy to screen the film anywhere. This was their goal. And the strange thing about it is that none of them have seen the film. This started going on before the film was actually screened anywhere. So they only saw the trailer. They didn't like the trailer. It was like, oh, the film is probably, against us and stuff like that. It wasn't against. It was the Bosnian Muslims, the Bosniaks, who were mostly against this film. Not even them as a nation, but like their lobby groups and these nationalist extremist groups who are very Serbophobic and anti-Serb. And they basically had a political agenda because it was a very tense political moment where the election laws and the way the governments are formed changed in Bosnia because of Schmidt's, the High Representative's moves, and they were very upset because they were essentially the Bosniak party that was in power for a really long time in Bosnia was losing power, and they wanted to present themselves, brand themselves as the protectors of all Bosniaks everywhere in the world. And here comes my film about Serbs in Bosnia, where they're mortal enemies, as they describe them in social media and everything they do. Not, as I said, Bosniaks or Bosnian Muslims, but they're politicians and interest groups that have an interest in promoting this hatred amongst the Bosniaks towards the Serbs, so they don't really notice that the politicians are capable of solving their economic problems. So here comes my film at perfect timing for them to try to cancel it and show they're all powerful. And they accuse the film of denying genocide. All these words that sound really horrible in the West. When you say like, "Oh, he's denying genocide," it sounds like I'm denying the Holocaust. I'm like this, promote. They said it was promoting war crimes, even though we said in the film very specifically that we condemn all war crimes, and it was horrible what happened, with an emphasis on Srebrenica, which is, arguably the war crime with the most casualties in a short period of time in the war in Bosnia. So we very specifically went into Srebrenica, went to Potocari, the memorial. We, bowed our heads to the victims that died there. We bowed our heads to the victims of all nationalities in the Bosnian War. This is something that, saying that one group matters more than the other, I think that's relativizing. I don't think it's, if we say that we care about Serb victims as much as we care about Bosnian Muslim victims, I think that's a very human thing to say, a humane thing to say. Yet, that didn't matter. The content of the film, it didn't matter at all. We could have, said, it could have been a cooking movie. It just, it didn't matter. They just used these words to frighten all these cinemas. And we actually talked to a bunch of those cinemas to cancel on us. Is that, well, we actually saw the film after we read all these things. We were like so scared. We saw the film. It's like, what they're saying, it's not in the film. Like, none of it is in the film. None of what they're basing it, but we have to cancel. It's like, why? If it's not in the film, why would you have to cancel? We're worried about PR, bad PR. And so we don't want these groups, because they're very influential. They already contacted the media. The media started contacting the cinemas. So they're like, oh my God, we're going to have this huge controversy, which is what we don't want. And it's like, but aren't you guys, you're cinemas in the West where it's all about, freedom and freedom of speech. And, especially if there's nothing wrong with the film, if there's nothing, illegal, I'm not promoting anything illegal. There's nothing shouldn't you stand by your values? There's actually this one cinema in Dortmund in Germany. The head person of the cinema was brave, and she said, you know what, we've been getting a ton of emails, and they terrorized these cinemas. They were phone calls, there were emails, there were constant pressure. There were even terrorist threats. There was this one guy who threatened to burn down every cinema that dares screen the film in Switzerland, for example. He wasn't even a Bosnian Muslim, he was an Albanian. But he was, really upset because, he also doesn't like Serbs. This is what, he has in common with the Bosnian Muslim extremists that were attacking the film. So there's this one woman in Dortmund in this Sinistar who said, we're going to screen this film no matter what. We saw that there's nothing wrong with the film. We believe in freedom of speech. We're going to screen this film. It's like, wow, this is like amazing that this is happening, that, you have this example.
And then the Albanian guy burned down the cinema.
No, luckily he didn't. But then the German Green Party basically put pressure on Sinistar in Berlin to put pressure on their Dortmund cinema to cancel the screening. And of course, they couldn't say no to their owners, so they canceled the screening. I was really, really amazed by how much, the Bosniak lobby was strong. They had their people in the Green Party that pushed for this. And, the Germans, we historically speaking, we Serbs have not had such a great relationship with the Germans. So it wasn't that hard, I'm assuming, to get the Germans, to do something against us Serbs. I think this was very easy thing to do. And maybe it's not even just the Bosnia. Maybe they're just, we can upset the Serbs. Let's do it. Why not? But this is one thing they didn't count on, and that's you're going against Serbs. So Serbs are incredibly. They have this thing called inat. It's like doing something in spite of the consequences, no matter what the consequences are. It's like, they threatened to bomb our bridges in 1999. We have parties on the bridges. this is who we are. So I think we're a little crazy in that regard, but I like us that way. I like that we're crazy that way. So I said to myself, look, I can do two things. I could just like admit that that they've won. They've canceled most of our venues. I could just do like that. You know that film, The Interview, from like 2014 or something, with like the American movie about Kim Jong-un, about these journalists going into North Korea to interview Kim Jong-un. And like North Korea had all these like cyber attacks on Sony Pictures, and they threatened to, attack cinemas in the US. And the film crew was like, oh my God, like this huge American production company, Sony Pictures, was like, oh my God, they're threatening cinemas. They're, doing all these attacks on us. So let's just release the film online, right? So I thought about that. Like maybe I can just release the film online. But to me, I was like, I would admit defeat, right? I would be like, I was pressured to do this. I didn't want to do this. I like my Q&As. I like being with the people. I like presenting the films. So I said to myself, we're going to screen these films no matter what. Okay. So we're going to do this. And we started getting alternative venues. And we started getting venues where we warn people, look, this is what's going to happen. This is what they're going to do to you. And if you don't want to do it, just tell us right away, And we found venues brave enough. We found, cinemas. We found cultural centers. We found even, religious venues in some instances where they were like, well, we believe in free speech, so we want to let you screen the film. So we found almost, I think, 95% of the cities where we planned to screen the film, we were able to screen. Maybe like one or two cities were left that we just couldn't find a venue. And that's it. Out of the tens and tens of screenings that we already have planned. But in addition to that, thanks to all these attacks, we were able to screen the film in over 100 cities. I went to every single screening apart from Australia. I went to every single screening and presented the film and talked to audiences. So in the end, they created an even bigger advertisement for the film that we've ever had, period. And for that, in fact, well, in Dortmund, for example, this is the most amazing thing. This is probably funnier to Serbian audience, but we talk about the story of Serbs in Bosnia throughout history, and as you can imagine, there's a fair bit of the film that talks about, if you know about Balkan history at all, you know that the Serbs, for the better part of their history in the last several centuries, they were fighting against the Turks, right? Because the Turks occupied all of the lands where Serbs resided, most of the lands, if not all, at some point in time where Serbs resided. So our entire struggle for independence was, and for freedom, and the movie is called Srpska, The Struggle for Freedom, was mostly against the Turks. It was not, the movie's not aimed against Bosnian Muslims, which were protesting. It was mostly against the Turks and, to an extent, the Austrians, the Austro-Hungarians, and the Germans, which also invaded our lands. So these are the groups that I guess should be, the historical revisionists at least should be upset with the film. When we were refused by every single venue in Dortmund after the cinema canceled, and this was like a couple of days before the premiere, we had a full house. The tickets were sold. We don't have a venue. And we're like scrambling to find any place that would screen the film. And we called all these places. There was like one venue left that we didn't call. And I asked my team, I said, well, why didn't you call the last place? And they said, well, look at the name, and it was like Fenerbahce, and Fenerbahce is the Turkish football club. It's a city in Turkey, but it's a Turkish cultural center. Okay, so I was like, well, ask them. You never know. And they asked the Turks, and the Turks were like, yeah, sure, screen the film, and they screened the film, and the Germans rejected us. And then the Turks taught the Germans a lesson in free speech in Germany, and this was really amazing. And we actually, when I published the photos, like the Bosniak extremists in Sarajevo went berserk because they considered Turkey to sort of be their grand protector and all these things, and they were like, this is we've been betrayed by the Turks. There was this one NGO in Sarajevo. He was like, the Turks have betrayed our people, and his name was actually Murat, which is a Turkish name. So the guy has a Turkish name, is like running against the Turks, and this to me was almost surreal in what was happening. But in the end, we managed to pull it off. and we really taught these guys a lesson. Don't try to do it again. I mean, yeah, you can get a venue canceled. I can get any venue canceled if I wanted. I have like 700,000 followers in social media. If I really wanted to like terrorize a cinema, I could tell all my followers, look, everybody just call the cinema, send them emails, and we'll get a screening canceled. But why would we do that? Like, why? I would, if I disagree, I would go to this venue, to this event, and like raise my hand and use the power of my, arguments and try to win the argument. And this is something I didn't do, at least for the most part. We had some Bosnian Muslim Bosniak activists come to a couple of the screenings in Vienna, most notably. Two of their representatives of their community came to the screening. We actually had some extremists who came as well, trying to cause trouble. But when they saw the police in front, they just went to the bathroom and like added some graffitis on the walls, whatever. But these two activists, they came in, they watched the film, they raised their hand afterwards, and it's like, well, we were expecting to see this like Nazi promoting like fascist film, promoting genocide and war crimes, and then the things I've been accused of. It's a show by itself. But and then they said, well, but it's not actually at all. Like, this is just a film about Serbs, about their history, about their rich tradition, about it actually it condemns the war crimes, it condemns all these bad things, and it says it never should have happened, and all these. They were so confused. I went to Sarajevo. Actually, I have friends there, and I have friends in media as well. And when I had a film premiere in East Sarajevo, which is populated by Serbs, I just announced that it's going to be a premiere in Sarajevo. And the mayor of Sarajevo, Benjamina Karic, flipped, and she went, started attacking me. We're not going to allow a premiere in Sarajevo and stuff like that. I wasn't, of course, expecting to have a premiere in Sarajevo, in the Bosniak Muslim-run part of Sarajevo. It was going to be in East Sarajevo. And but I was invited by a group of very brave journalists in Sarajevo as a part of the Freedom, Oslobođenje, Freedom media group, and they asked me like, well, what's going on, because they knew me from before, obviously, and they were like, what happened, what's going on with this film? It's like, well, they're making a big deal out of the film, and everything you've heard about the film is not true. I was like, well, can we see the film? Can you send it to us? I'm like, no, I'm not going to send it, but can you organize a little screening in Sarajevo, in the Bosniak Muslim part? I was like, yeah, we could do a media screening. So I went in there and I showed the film, and I asked them afterwards, well, what do you think about the film? I was like, well, it's not even close to what we imagined it. And I actually posted a photo of that media screening, and I actually said, well, we had our premiere in Sarajevo. Here it is. And then the mayor just flipped, and they interviewed me after the screening, and they started, the journalists that interviewed me, they just asked me questions. That's it. And they were tough. They were fair. They were tough but fair. And then they got attacked by all these extremists. They were threatening to like kill this journalist who interviewed me, threatening to hang him and his wife, who was a Serb. He's a Bosnian Muslim. So, Bosniak, as they're called today. I'm sorry, I usually just say Bosniak, but, a lot of people don't know. So, you had this, they had special shows on other Sarajevo TV stations where they discussed the interview with me on this other channel. So it is so completely surreal. None of them seen the film. They're commenting on the film. And then even on this one show, this journalist asked them, like, well, but which part of the film was exactly problematic for you? She's like, well, I haven't seen the film. I was like, it's insane. But I could talk about this for 2 hours. I don't want to.
Classic making a mountain out of a molehill. I think in Russian we have an expression that fear makes your eyes big, as in you exaggerate the threat without actually, examining it objectively. So it sounds exactly like that. But I'm glad that there is a way out of cancel culture, because terrorizing film venues doesn't seem like it's a direction that our society should be pursuing. So Boris, what are you working on now, and where can people find your work? Is it your website, or is it your social media?
Well, both, I guess. Social media, website. You can go on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok.
Just got banned from there for a week. Free speech.
Exactly. No, yeah, or they can go to malagurski.com. I'm working on a new documentary film. It's going to be called Serbia, a Mythical Exploration. And it's going to try to okay, I'll tell you. The ulterior motive to making this film is to boost Serbia's tourism. So I want people to come to Serbia. That's just, I'm being completely honest with you guys. I want people to come to Serbia. And I fully realize that a lot of tourists who go to a certain country, they go for the stories, right? They go for what they've heard about the country. They go for all these, interesting anecdotes that they've heard of. I've been to Italy many times, and I'm a huge fan of Italy. It's like my favorite tourist destination outside of Serbia. And but what I've realized, you're walking around Italy, and it's a stone, right? It's just a stone, right? It's nothing spectacular. But then they add this, plaque next to the stone. It's like, Caesar touched this stone, right? Or Caesar had, this idea of whatever. And there's like a billion, Japanese tourists taking photos of the stone. So it's like, and I realized we have stones, right? We have lots of all these fun things like rocks and
They're very, very ancient.
We just have to label them appropriately.
Absolutely. And so a lot of people don't know that vampires are actually a part of Serbia's mythology, and we all sort of associate vampires with Romania, with Transylvania, but we actually own that story. So I actually thought it would be interesting. That's just the most notable one, but there are lots of other interesting stories. Why not combine them into one movie, which gives us an excuse to go over all of Serbia and present all of our natural beauty and our traditions and our culture and our food and all these amazing things about this country, and show people like, okay, we may not have beaches like Rio de Janeiro, which are spectacularly amazing, and nobody else has beaches that great. We may not have architecture on the level of the Kremlin or and all these things. Okay, we don't have that. We have nice architecture. We have nature that is great, that is beautiful. We have stories. We have people. We have something that we can market to the world and maybe inspire them to come and visit us, because all of the people that I've talked to that have ever visited Serbia, and I asked them, like, what is it that you like the most about Serbia? And they say, it's the people. It's the people, just talking to people here, just getting to know Serbs who live here. That was their number one impression of Serbia. So for that to happen, they need to actually come here. For them to come here, we can't just market, the architecture, the natural beauty, and all these. We'll do that, but it has to be connected to something bigger than that, and those are the mythical stories that we have that have inspired generations throughout history, and they're really interesting, really fun, and some of them are really funny, and I think that people are going to enjoy it. I actually applied for funding from the Film Center of Serbia, which may have been a futile thing to do because I've never received any funding from the Film Center of Serbia. Maybe because I'm not a member of any ruling political party, and this may be, an issue. But in any case, I don't complain that much. I complain a little bit. I am Serbian, but not that much. I decided to open up donations. So if people heard what I just said about the film, and they think, hey, that's a good idea. Even if they're not Serbian, they just think, well, let's help this guy trying to promote his country. They can go to malagurski.com and click on the PayPal link and donate towards this film. And it really means a lot because our film team is very young. Our for example, in Srpska, the Struggle for Freedom, our executive producer, while we were making the film, she was 24. So that's really young for an executive producer. We try to give young people a shot to show what they can do. And she was amazing. She's Anja Grubacic is her name. She's the most amazing executive producer I've ever worked with. And she's from the town of Trebinje in Herzegovina. And, great shout out to her if she's watching. She probably is. So it was just an amazing experience working with all these amazing young people.
Basically,
and we're
go to malagurski.com, which we will link to this episode, and donate. And I think folklore is one of my favorite things about different countries. I think this is exactly as you said. This is exactly how you learn about sort of really large chunks of history in a kind of a short period. It's almost like this logos of a culture that you get to absorb through folklore. So yes, definitely label more rocks, more stones. I've had Serbia on my bucket list for a long time, but it has yet to happen.
You have to come.
I know. I will be. Well, once the movie comes out, I think that might be a way to convince me.
No, you have to come before that. You have to promise now, live, that you will come in the next 2 years. Let's say 2 years, okay? 2 years.
I intend to visit Serbia in the next 2 years, and I intend to love the way my trip happens. There we go. I think we can wrap it up on this positive note.
If you decide to come, I will wait for you at the airport. I will pick you up and I will show you Belgrade. I actually made a film about Belgrade several years back, so there's no better guide to Belgrade than me.
And we have the Canadian connection too, so we can kind of trash Canada a little bit, you know, outside live, outside video settings. That would be interesting. Well, thank you so much. This was an amazing conversation. It was kind of unexpected. I think the health and economics and the food industry was a really nice addition, because we haven't really touched upon this, but it's definitely a subject that's interesting to me. Marcelo, any parting words? I know it's for both of you guys. I don't want to keep you up.
I'm gonna have to invite you another time, because this was I still have like 25 questions that I have written down.
We'll try to go through the next 5 in the next interview.
No, it's okay. Yeah, probably we can do 2, perhaps.
No, but that's the thing. You ask me a question, you have to cut me. You have to stop me, right? Because I can talk nonstop.
You know, anytime we stop guests, we get some viewers complain that
No, let me tell you something. Let me tell all the viewers who are watching this. Hosts need to stop people from talking, because then you get this show that we just had, where I talk about something for like 30 minutes and we get through 4 questions instead of 25. Okay, so
but very in depth. I think it's very, very elucidating. But yes,
so don't you dare touch these hosts. They're really good hosts, and let them stop people from talking. Let them do it and don't complain about it anymore.
There you go, guys. We have a Serbian defender. But yes, guys, visit malagurski.com, visit his Instagram, visit his Twitter.
All the links are going to be on the description. Remember to like, share, subscribe to all the channels, the Nina Byzantina, the Press of Mass Destruction, and also to Boris Malagurski. You have all the links here. You can go. And thank you very
so
much
for coming. This was awesome.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure. Anytime you like, give me a call. I'm here.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Bye, guys. Thank you for watching.
Bye-bye.
Bye.